My parents called me a worthless nobody and disowned me after I told them that I had dropped out of college 5 years later. Now they are begging me for an invite to my wedding, so I said yes and did something they never saw coming. Hi everyone, I'm Kate, 31 female, and I have seen some seriously entitled parents. My parents were super controlling when I was a kid. They decided everything about my life. I couldn't make my own choices at all. They even controlled what I studied in school. I had to take the classes they chose, even if they were boring. I couldn't study what I was actually interested in, because they only cared about me making money someday. They wanted me to be successful, but only in the way they thought was right. My parents completely controlled my social life. They told me who I could be friends with, usually picking kids from good families, even if I didn't like them. This made me feel really lonely. They also decided on all my after-school activities. I could only do things that would look good on college applications. They wouldn't let me do anything just for fun, so I felt really trapped. Worst of all, they even controlled how I dressed. I had to follow their strict rules and couldn't wear anything that showed who I really was. I felt like I was always being watched and judged. In addition to the obvious ways they control me, my parents had strict rules for every part of my life. They always wanted to know where I was, who I was with, and what I was doing. Even when I became an adult, they wouldn't stop treating me like a kid. It felt like they refused to believe I could make my own choices. Worse yet, my parents wouldn't let me handle my own money. They managed my finances even after I got a job. They would question everything I bought, even the basic stuff I really needed. Having them control my money made me feel like I would never be a real adult. And of course, my parents meddled in my love life. They pressured me to date people they liked, usually focusing on money and family background instead of whether I was actually happy. They made it really hard to have healthy relationships because I was always worried about what they would think instead of what I really wanted. Their need to control everything made growing up incredibly difficult. My parents wouldn't let me dream my own dreams. They decided what my future should be and wouldn't listen if I disagreed. They expected me to be perfect at whatever career they chose for me. This pressure was horrible. I felt trapped and like I would never be good enough. Honestly, growing up with parents like this was a constant fight to be myself. They tried to control everything, leaving me with no room to figure out who I was. My childhood wasn't easy, but I always had my best friend Lily, 31 female. From the moment we met, Lily and I were inseparable, two peas in a pod. We told each other everything, sharing our biggest dreams, our deepest secrets, and even those embarrassing moments that make you cringe. She was more than a friend. She was my lifeline, the person I could always count on. The best part of our friendship was Lily's family. They were the complete opposite of mine, and they became like a second family to me. Whenever things got tough at home, I could always escape to their house. They welcomed me with open arms, never making me feel like an outsider. Lily's parents treated me like one of their own, and for the first time, I felt like I truly belonged somewhere. I'll never forget all the weekends I spent at Lily's house. We'd stay up late watching movies, bake cookies until the kitchen was a mess, or just talk for hours about everything and nothing. Her parents always made us feel right at home, making sure we had piles of snacks, cozy blankets, and endless hot chocolate. But it wasn't just the treats that made Lily's house special. It was the warmth of her family. They made me feel accepted and loved, something I didn't always get at home. They would listen to me without judging, and were always there with advice or a shoulder to cry on. I'll never forget the time I had a huge fight with my parents about my career plans. I wanted something different from their expectations, and they were furious. I was so upset. I didn't know what to do. Lily's parents could tell something was wrong and immediately took me in. They reassured me that I wasn't a failure, and even helped me figure out some practical steps to make a plan for myself. Another time, I was really struggling with anxiety and depression. My own parents didn't understand and just told me to snap out of it. But Lily's parents listened to my fears without judging me. They understood how real my feelings were and helped me find the support I needed to start feeling better. The best thing about Lily's family was that they made me feel unconditionally loved. Even when I messed up, they never gave up on me. They were always there to remind me that I was a good person, even when I didn't believe in myself. Honestly, I don't know how I would have survived those difficult years without Lily and her family. They gave me the strength and support I needed to deal with the challenges of growing up. I'll always be incredibly grateful for their love and kindness. Going away to college changed my life. For the first time, I was away from my parents and their constant control. It felt amazing to be free. No more rules, no more having them watch my every move. It was like this huge weight was gone, and I could finally just be myself. Of course, my parents still try to plan everything. What classes I took, how I should spend my time, even pushing me towards specific internships. But being on my own for the first time gave me the courage to start making some of my own choices. The first thing I did was sign up for an art history class. I'd always loved art, but my parents would have hated the idea of me studying it. They wanted me to focus on something quote-unquote practical, but now I could call my own shots. So I decided to follow my heart instead of their plans. The art history class was a revelation. It wasn't just about facts and dates. It opened my mind to the power of creativity and how different cultures express themselves. For the first time, I realized there was more to life than just following the path my parents set out for me. College wasn't about taking new classes though. I finally had the chance to meet all kinds of new people. I joined clubs, volunteered, and found a whole community that shared my interests and passions. It felt amazing to connect with others who actually cared about the same things I did. Of course, I couldn't completely ignore my parents' advice. There was a lot of pressure to follow their plan, but I started doing it on my own terms, finding ways to combine their expectations with the things I really wanted. When my parents found out that I'd taken classes they didn't approve of, they were furious. It felt like all the freedom of my first year of college was snatched away in an instant. I was right back where I started, following their plan without a single choice of my own. At first, I tried to tell myself it was fine. I was still getting a good education, wasn't I? But inside, it was eating away at me. Every class and every assignment felt meaningless. Just another box to check on their list for me. The pressure to please them was unbearable. I felt trapped, constantly afraid to make a move they wouldn't approve of. It wasn't just about classes anymore. It felt like my whole sense of self was being chipped away. Who was I if I couldn't even decide what to study? As my second year wore on, I grew more and more miserable. All I wanted was to explore my interests and find my own way. But every time I thought of changing my path, I felt a crushing wave of guilt and fear. What if I let my parents down? It was a constant battle inside me, wanting to make them happy and wanting desperately to be my own person. I felt like a fraud, pretending to be the perfect daughter they expected, while inside I was screaming to break free. The worst part was how this was destroying me. I couldn't focus in class anymore, or find the energy to study. I felt lonely and cut off, even around other students. I was stuck in a cycle of doing what I was told and hating myself for it. And I had no idea how to escape. I couldn't take it anymore. I couldn't keep pretending to be someone I wasn't just to please my parents. Something had to change. I knew I needed to take my life back, even if it meant everything falling apart. The decision to drop out of college wasn't easy. It felt like I was taking my whole carefully planned future and setting it on fire. But in my heart, I knew it was the right thing to do, even though the thought of facing my parents terrified me. Finally, the day came when I couldn't avoid it any longer. Telling my parents was the hardest thing I've ever done. Their anger was like a physical force in the room, a storm cloud exploding with rage. For days, they wouldn't let it go. They tried everything, begging me to change my mind, threatening to cut me off, trying to make me feel guilty, but I was done. Nothing they could say would make me change my decision. Finally, it all exploded. The tension had been building for weeks, and now it cracked wide open. They screamed at me, saying horrible things, questioning my intelligence, my character, even whether I was worth loving at all. Their words cut me like knives. I felt like I was drowning, suffocating under the weight of their anger and disappointment. How could the people who were meant to love me be so cruel? But even as the pain washed over me, something inside of me wouldn't break. A spark of defiance ignited. I wouldn't let them define me. I stood up a little straighter, looked them in the eye and said, "I'm going to make my own way in the world, whether you like it or not." Their reaction was horrible. They laughed at me, called me a worthless nobody, and said they didn't even know me anymore. Hearing them disown me felt like a physical blow. It was crushing. The pain of their rejection mixed with shock and disbelief. I felt completely lost. My family was gone, my home suddenly a hostile place, and everything I'd always known shattered. Leaving my parents' house was a blur of tears and adrenaline. I started driving with no destination in mind, my whole world spinning out of control. Suddenly, I remember Lily's parents. They had always been kind to me, a safe haven when things were rough at home. Desperate for comfort, for even a little bit of stability, I drove straight to their house. When I finally arrived, I couldn't even form proper sentences. I just sobbed and told them everything. To my immense relief, they didn't hesitate for a second. They hugged me, made me dinner, and gave me a warm bed. Just knowing I wasn't completely alone was overwhelming. Someone still cared about me, even when my own family didn't. The next day, Lily got home from college. Her parents filled her in, and the first thing she did was give me a huge hug. "It's going to be okay," she promised. "We'll figure this out together." Hearing her say that felt like a lifeline, a reminder that even in this mess, I still had her. I was completely lost about my next steps, but I refused to let this break me. I didn't know what I wanted to do, so I turned to the internet. I did some research and found an online graphic design course. It wasn't exactly the path my parents wanted for me, but it felt exciting. A chance to tap into my creative side and maybe even learn skills that could create new opportunities. Along with the online course, I snagged a waitressing job at a local diner. The tips weren't amazing, but they gave me enough cash to cover the basics while I got my life sorted. I tried to pay rent to Lily's parents, but they wouldn't take a penny. They just wanted me to get back on my feet. So, instead, I showed my gratitude by helping out, buying groceries, cooking dinner, cleaning up more than my share. I was obsessed with graphic design. Every spare minute was spent on lessons and practice. Soon, I felt confident enough to take on some freelancing gigs. Honestly, the internet was my best friend during this time. Whenever I got stuck, I could dig up tutorials, join forums, and find the answers I needed. And the work paid off. Soon I had more clients than I could handle and was finally able to support myself completely. Turns out, I had a bit of talent for illustration too. Adding that to my skills made finding freelance work even easier. Before long, I'd saved enough to get my own place. Nothing fancy, but it was mine. That felt like such a victory. It was proof that I could really make it on my own, without my parents dictating my every move. Lily's parents were amazing. They gave me the support I needed to get my feet under me, and I'll never forget that. Finally moving out was bittersweet. I was so grateful for their help, but also excited to show myself what I could do. Leaving their house, I wasn't the scared, broken girl who'd arrived months before. I was stronger, confident, and ready to build the life I wanted. Just when I was finally on my feet, the pandemic hit. Suddenly, my waitressing job was gone. It felt like another punch after all I'd already been through, but I refused to give up. I threw myself fully into freelancing, determined to make it work. I also took a chance and started an Instagram account to showcase my artwork. It was a way to get my work out there and hopefully connect with new clients. Fast forward 5 years, I'm now a successful freelance illustrator. My Instagram has become a huge source of clients and a community of people who love my work. I'm always learning and branching out, taking on new projects to keep things exciting. And of course, Lily's been there the whole time, my best friend, my rock, and the sister I chose for myself. We've been through so much together, celebrating the good times and supporting each other through the hard ones. Our friendship is stronger than ever, and I'm so grateful to have her in my life. Meeting Andy, 31 male, was the best kind of surprise. He's kind, funny, and believes in me more than I sometimes believe in myself. We fell for each other quickly, and it wasn't long before we both knew it was meant to be. These days, life feels good. We're planning our future, and I'm so grateful for the path I took to get here. It wasn't easy, but I built a life I love, filled with creativity, amazing friends, and the promise of so much more. Of course, there's still a part of me that hurts. My parents and I haven't spoken in years. Neither of us has reached out. The thought of them still stings, reminding me of everything that's been lost. So when I saw my mom's name on my phone after 5 years, my heart literally stopped. Suddenly, all those complicated feelings rushed back. The hurt, the anger, but also a tiny spark of hope. Should I answer it? What would I even say? I took a deep breath and answered. My mom's voice was instantly familiar, yet so distant now. For a moment, I couldn't even reply when she asked how I was doing. Talking to her felt like stepping back into a time machine. But I found my voice and agreed to meet her that weekend. I knew it was time to face this, to try and close this chapter of my life once and for all. Telling Andy about it was hard, but he was amazing. He just listened, then hugged me and said that he would be with me the whole way. Knowing I wasn't facing this alone made all the difference. The drive to my parents' house felt like a million miles. My hands were shaking with nerves, but also with determination. This time, I was going in as my own person, ready to stand up for myself. Walking through their front door, everything felt awkward. We were like strangers, trying to play the part of a family. The tension thrummed between us, hidden under forced smiles and empty questions. Suddenly, the conversation went off the rails. They asked me why I hadn't invited them to my wedding. My heart jumped up to my throat. I hadn't planned on telling them I was even married. When I admitted that, my mom looked shocked and then angry. She insisted they had a right to be there, that it was my wedding, and she had to give me away. The nerve of her. I reminded her that she disowned me years ago. She just blinked. Then she said that I was being stubborn, like it was all my fault. Suddenly, they were acting like nothing had happened, as if the whole rift was no big deal. Honestly, I was ready to fight, but they just kept going, asking me to come home, guilt-tripping me about family and forgiveness. It was exhausting. And as the room started to spin, I heard myself saying something I immediately regretted. Inviting them to the wedding was the worst kind of compromise. It did not stop the fight, but deep down I knew it was a mistake. I could already see this wouldn't be a real reconciliation, just more of the same old pain swept under the rug. The lead up to the wedding was awful. Despite my best efforts, my mom wouldn't stop trying to take over, choosing flowers, picking music, and even suggesting changes to my dress. I had to keep reminding myself that this was my day and she wasn't going to ruin it. On the wedding day itself, they acted annoyed, showing up late as if the whole thing was a bother. Then my dad just assumed that he would be walking me down the aisle. After everything, he thought he could just play the doting dad. I held my ground and told him no. Lily's dad, Richard, would be the one walking me down the aisle. He's the one who actually deserved the honor, the one who had always treated me like a daughter. Seeing the look on my dad's face was painful, but also satisfying. I'd spent too long wanting this love, only to realize I was better off without it. Lily and Andy gave me the support I needed to finally put my parents in their place, where they couldn't keep hurting me. My parents started yelling, of course, but Lily stepped up, her voice firm. She wouldn't let them ruin my day and let them right out of the venue. It felt amazing to have someone fighting for me, refusing to let them ruin my happiness. With their yelling fading away, I took Richard's arm and walked down the aisle. It felt right. I beamed with happiness, knowing I was surrounded by people who truly loved me. As the sun set, I felt like the luckiest woman on earth. When I saw Andy at the altar, his eyes full of hope, I knew I'd made the right choice. This was where I belonged. We said our vows, promising to love and support each other always. As we kissed, it felt like the start of an amazing adventure. This was the best day of my life, a celebration of love, but also of the strength it took to get here. Dancing under the stars with Andy and our friends, I felt so happy and hopeful. I knew things wouldn't always be easy, but I also knew we would face whatever came together. We'd build a life filled with love and laughter, a life that was all our own. However, given how sad my parents were during the reception, I couldn't help but feel a little bit guilty. Even though I had no intention of letting my dad walk me down the aisle, I could have at least given them a heads up. So, do you guys think that I'm the a-hole for not letting my parents know that my dad won't be walking me down the aisle? Okay, things have been crazy since the wedding. Amidst the honeymoon bliss and thank you notes, I finally checked my mom's messages after about 2 weeks. I had put her on mute. Surprise, my mom had blown it up with messages and missed calls. Honestly, part of me was dreading it, but another part figured, why not? They wanted to talk, so I texted back and told them to come over the next day. Yesterday, right on time, there they were on my doorstep. I wasn't sure what to expect. More yelling? Apologies? Honestly, a little bit of both seemed possible. We sat down, and before I could even get a word in, they started listing their demands for forgiveness. Of course, I was supposed to apologize for everything, and then it would all be okay. Except, I had nothing to apologize for. So we started arguing all over again. Part of me wanted to fight, to make them understand how they hurt me. But another part was just so tired. I wanted this over and done with, so I could move on and have some peace in my life. I wanted them to be a part of my future, but I knew in my heart that things would never really be okay with us. So in a moment I'm not proud of, I caved. I mumbled a half-hearted apology, mostly just to shut them up and get them out of my house. The tension eased, but it felt hollow. Another band-aid on a gaping wound. I thought at least it was over, and then of course, they had to drop one more bombshell. They wanted Richard to apologize. Apologize for what? For loving me and being there for me when my own father wasn't? Seriously? My mom insisted it wasn't about love. It was about tradition and my dad's feelings. But that was ridiculous. Richard was a million times more of a dad to me than my biological father. I wasn't going to ask him to apologize to keep my parents happy, and I told them so in no uncertain terms. When I refused the ridiculous demand about Richard, they started threatening me with my inheritance. Honestly, I was so disgusted I almost laughed. They thought they could control me by dangling money in front of me like they had when I was a kid. It was pathetic. I looked them in the eye and said, I don't want anything from you. I've been supporting myself for years. It felt amazing to say that out loud, to declare my independence after all this time. Of course, they didn't respect that. Instead, it became another argument about being disrespectful and ungrateful. It was like they literally couldn't understand that I was my own person now, not a little girl they could boss around or punish. That was it for me. I was exhausted, and I knew this conversation was going nowhere. I told them I had somewhere to be, which I didn't, and asked them to please leave. It wasn't easy, but it felt necessary to protect myself. As they walked out the door, I was shaking a little, but also felt incredibly strong. I couldn't help but wonder how they could possibly treat me like this after everything. It seemed like they had no understanding of how much they'd hurt me, and maybe never would. It was sad, but also kind of freeing to finally accept that. Okay, you guys, things just got seriously weird. I think my parents have officially jumped the shark. They're on some kind of weird mission to make me and everyone around me miserable. So, not even 2 days after their visit, they take their whole drama show on the road. Instead of trying to talk to me, they go after Richard. My mom literally stalked him down at church and started ranting about how he'd stolen her daughter and poisoned me against them. Lily called me yesterday, so mad she could barely speak. Apparently, my mom made a total scene, yelling and crying in front of the whole church. Can you even imagine? It's so embarrassing, but also kind of crazy. I was beyond furious when I heard about the church scene. How dare they go after Richard like that? He's the best person I know, and he's been an amazing support system when my own family has completely failed me. It's bad enough that they're constantly trying to control my life, but this was just low. Harassing innocent people to try to get to me? Seriously, what is wrong with them? Honestly, I'm starting to wonder if they even realize how crazy they sound. They seem trapped inside this bubble where they're always the victim. It's like they're incapable of seeing how much damage they cause with their words and actions. Fueled by anger, I drove straight to my parents' house. My heart was a drumbeat in my chest, and by the time I reached the door, I was ready to explode. I pounded my fist against it, the sound echoing through the quiet neighborhood. When my mom opened the door, I didn't even wait for her to speak. I pushed past her and stormed inside. "Enough is enough," I screamed. "I'm so sick of this." They looked shocked, which was satisfying after years of letting them walk all over me. I launched into my tirade, my voice shaking with rage. "How dare you go after Richard? He's the best thing that's happened to me, and you treat him like garbage? After everything, that's how you show your love?" My mom started to speak, but I cut her off. "Don't even try it," I warned, my voice shaking. "I'm done letting you control this. I'm done letting you hurt me." My dad tried to step in, talking in that soft, reasonable voice that always used to make me give in. Not this time. I was done being their puppet, done trying to earn their love when they clearly weren't capable of giving it. "You want Richard to apologize?" I almost laughed. It was so ridiculous. "Well, how about this? I'm sorry. Sorry I ever let you back after everything you did. Sorry I thought things could be different." Tears started to spill down my face. It wasn't just anger anymore, but also the pain of finally admitting to myself that they would never be the parents I needed. "I don't want to hear it," I choked out. "If you pull another stunt like you did with Richard, you'll regret it, and I mean it." I left without another word. As I walked away, it felt like I was finally closing the door on a part of myself. The part that still hoped they might change, that they might understand. Driving home, I felt a mix of things: relief, adrenaline, and a deep bone weariness. It felt good to stand up for myself, but it was also a kind of goodbye. I've lost my parents before, but this time felt different. This time, I was walking away, not out of anger, but to protect myself, to finally build a life without their constant negativity and control. A life where I could just be me. Hey everyone, remember that whole drama with my parents? Yeah, it's not over. After our epic argument, I figured they would get the message, but no. Turns out they aren't big on boundaries. The past month has been full of ignored calls and texts from them. Love bombs, guilt trips, straight up pleading, the works. I try to stay strong, but honestly, it was wearing me down. Finally, I just blocked them. I know it sounds harsh, but I needed peace. Blocking them was tough, but it felt like a weight lifted. I needed space to breathe and heal without them constantly reopening my wounds. Of course, that wasn't the end of it. They reached out to Andy next, trying to pull him into their drama. He's a sweetheart and even listened to them a few times, but when I found out, I told him to stop. If they wanted to talk, they could go through me, and I wasn't interested. Honestly, taking control like that felt amazing. Setting boundaries with them was the hardest, most empowering thing I've done in a long time. I may still be hurting, but at least I'm not their puppet anymore. The silver lining of this whole mess has been how it's brought me closer to Lily and her parents. That awkwardness with Richard didn't last. Lily's not the one to hold a grudge, and thankfully, neither is he. Lily's been incredible. She always knows just what to say and when to just listen and let me cry. And her parents, I don't know what I would do without them. They treat me like their own daughter, and it means the world to finally feel like I belong after all this time. It's made me realize that even though my relationship with my actual parents is a mess, I've got an amazing support system in my life. People who love me for me, support my choices, and always have my back. That means more than anything. Thank you all. That is all from my side. And that was a wrap up for today's story. Thank you very much for listening. Smash the like button for me and subscribe for more stories. Thanks again, and we'll be seeing you in the next one.